Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. It's been good. It's been a lot of fun to do this month. Obviously, the busiest month of the year in recruiting, and it's been a lot of fun to kind of get into a nice little groove with the Utah Blockcast, especially doing it on YouTube now. So excited about that and excited to continue to grow on this platform. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and appreciate everybody for continuing to support, the Blockcast on, the regular podcast platforms and all that. So appreciate everybody. Excited for what's to come, this season and so it should be a lot of fun in year 2 with KSL Sports. So looking forward to that. And it's been a pretty productive month of recruiting for Utah football. They came into the month with only one pledge in the class, and that was Texas linebacker / defensive end Preston Pitts. And now they exit June. As of right now, June 30th, 5:10 p.m. is when I'm recording this. They currently have 13 commits. And we're on watch for a few others that could potentially announce their commitments really at any moment. So, but overall, adding 12 commitments to the 2026 class, it's been really productive for Utah, particularly that last weekend of official visitors for Utah. I think Utah's now secured 6 of the 9 visitors, their commitments at least, the most recent one being JUCO tight end Josiah Jefferson. And so, really, really impressive work by Utah to be where they're at. And we're going to, dive into, all that and what's kind of the latest on their remaining targets and where things stand for their top remaining targets, which, Utah's done a really good job building the foundation of this 2026 class. And now it's about, adding those final pieces, which I think will really round out the class and help it a lot. So we'll talk about that. We'll break down where things stand with a handful of their top remaining targets. And then, too, I also want to dive into Utah basketball recruiting. It's, a new regime with Alex Jensen and Wes Wilcox at the helm of the program. And, I think Utah fans should feel really confident and optimistic about the future of Runnin Utes hoops. And I think with what we've seen so far on the recruiting trail, with the offers that they've extended and who they're getting in the mix with, I think those are very encouraging signs. And so I want to talk more about Runnin Utes basketball recruiting, where things stand, and just kind of some thoughts, on the program with Alex and Wes leading the way. And so want to talk about all that as well on this episode. So, another big recruiting episode on this one. But first, Utah announced earlier today, as well as, all the other Big 12 programs, who their player representatives are going to be at Big 12 Media Days next week. Again, that's next week. I can't believe it's already here. But at the same time, I can't wait for it to get here. It's exciting. It's going to be in Dallas. We're going to be at the Ford Center at the Star in Frisco, which is the home of the Dallas Cowboys. And so at least their headquarters, I shouldn't say the home of the Dallas Cowboys, but that's their practice facility and headquarters. So that is where we'll be next week. Excited to get out there, not only for media days, but for Texas barbecue and other good spots. So if you have any recommendations of where to eat, you guys know where to find me and where to slide into those DMs. I will always welcome food recommendations, especially out of town recommendations. So if you got those, that'll be great. But like I said, Utah announced their player representatives, and they're going to send quarterback Devin Dampier, offensive tackle Spencer Fano, linebacker Landon Barton, and cornerback Smith Snowden to represent the program at Big 12 Media Days. And I think this is pretty exciting. Over the last few years, we've grown accustomed to this being Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, Junior Funa, and Karenni Reed, and those familiar faces. I think this is really the big moment of, kind of that turning of the page, right, into a new chapter of Utah football, and to have these guys represent Utah, at media days, I think is really exciting because we'll get to see these personalities, in a pretty unique setting. And so excited for that. And this is a key step for Utah, not media days specifically, but, these players emerging as leaders. This was something that I wrote about actually back in December, is the need for, new leadership, and how, change can be difficult, but it can also be a really good thing. And I think having new energy, new appreciation, and new hunger, I think are good things to have in a program. And that's what we've seen, with Devin Dampier coming into the program and taking control of the offense, obviously with his understanding of the scheme and all that, but stepping up as a leader and off the field, I think has been really important for kind of the vibes turning around with the program. This is obviously the last 2 years have been really difficult, but I think Utah has the type of leadership to right the ship this year. So, like I said, excited to see these guys next week at Big 12 Media Days, and like I said, all other Big 12 programs announced their representatives as well. So it's going to be jam-packed event next week, another 2-day event with all 16 teams down there in Dallas. Utah is going to be day 2 of the media coverage. So, I might have to get out, go golfing in Dallas. So if you have any golf recommendations of where to go, if you want to go out for 9/18, if you live in Dallas, if you're listening to this and live in Dallas, please feel free to hit me up as well. So I might have to sneak out day 1 since Utah won't be there, but excited for Big 12 Media Days. And then the other big thing I want to make sure to mention here, Utah football has announced their 2025 Ring of Honor inductees, and 2 very deserving individuals at that, with former head coach Ron McBride, and then a versatile athlete back in the day, Roy Jefferson, did a little bit of everything for Utah football, and I think these are 2 well-deserving inductees into the Ring of Honor. Obviously, you can't tell the story of Utah football today without Ron McBride and the role he played in turning around this program. And then with Roy Jefferson, played from 1962 to 1964. So this is well before, what we know now as Utah football. But Utah back in the day was a really strong program and had a lot of really good players that hold records and hold places, in the history books of Utah football that just get glossed over because they played so far back. But I think having somebody like Roy Jefferson, who just did so much for this program, was an all-WAC selection a handful of times, did just a bit of everything offensively, defensively for Utah, and helping them during those 62-63 seasons, I think is great. So those 2 will be the inductees this season. I think that's great. And so that'll be really, really cool. And that ceremony will be September 6th against Cal Poly, the first home game of the season. So pretty cool to have that. Obviously, it was great last year with Alex Smith being the first inductee into the Ring of Honor. And I think this is a good second group of inductees into the Ring of Honor. So really excited to see this continue to grow and become bigger and have more representatives in it as well. So really cool stuff today. But let's dive into it. Utah recruiting, starting with Utah football, obviously. Again, keep in mind, they entered the month with only 1 commit in Preston Pitts, a 3-star edge, and they now will exit the month with 13 commits in the class. So they've added 12 additions to their 2026 class, and it's a pretty solid collection of prospects. I really like this group, and this is a class that when you think of Utah football, you see a lot of the bread and butter that Utah has become known for in terms of identifying under the radar prospects that have potential but just aren't on everybody's radar. But once you watch the tape and you look into their profile a little bit, you see a lot of the qualities that Utah has just centered on and focused on in their recruiting efforts. Guys like Javion Ramon out of Lubbock, Texas, the 6'6", 250-pound defensive lineman. How he only had Baylor, UTEP, and Utah offers baffles me when you watch his tape, knowing that he's 6'6", 250. And again, I think I mentioned this on the previous episode, but there's a picture of him, posing next to Luther Ellis, and it's baffling his size, and he's still just kind of a pup. He has so much room to grow and continue to add mass without really impacting, his athleticism, and I think that's really exciting. And there's a couple other guys. Major Hinchin is another guy that I think kind of fits that mold of under the radar type, good track numbers, great size, 6'2", good length. So you just see a lot of Utah's bread and butter, and they've built a strong foundation with these 12 additions to the class. They've addressed multiple needs across the roster at different positions, and they found some real diamonds in the rough and guys that again maybe were unrated and unranked, didn't have the biggest profile, but when you consider the track record that Utah has of identifying guys before others get on board, you really feel encouraged by a handful of guys. Like I said, Ramon, Hinchin, Dylan Waters is another guy that I think could blossom into a higher profile recruit as well. And you like that about Utah, getting back to the roots of scouting, identifying what works for them, and going out and getting their guys. And I think that's what we've seen so far with this class. And, so currently with 13 commits, Utah's class ranks 66th in the country. And I think, again, they've laid the foundation of their class with these 13 commits so far. I think there's a handful of guys that are certainly guys capable of earning a ratings bump, as we get into their senior seasons and as we watch these guys develop. I think, Ramon, I think Preston Pitts is certainly capable of getting to 4-star status. Dylan Waters, Major Hinchins, those are a few guys that I think have the potential to see their recruiting profile, their ratings get bumped to potentially 4-star status. So there's that. And I think right now, being ranked 66th, they've built a strong foundation. But currently, their highest rated prospect is LaMarcus Bell, who has a high 3-star rating and an 89 rating. And, with the way that 24/7 Sports does their team rankings, the higher the highest rated prospect is, the more room there is for points in their ranking system. So right now, Utah is just limited because their ceiling is capped at with an 89 rated prospect, right? And so the good news here that gets us into the good news is that Utah is currently in the mix with a handful of blue chip prospects that raise the ceiling of this class because they are so highly rated, and that will have a significant impact on this class ranking if Utah is able to close the deal with them. So Utah is, they've got work to do to seal the deal with a handful of their remaining top targets. But if it all comes together, Utah has the potential to jump from 66th in the team rankings all the way up to into the 30s, potentially cracking the top 30 if things really go their way. And I think that's just something to keep in mind. So, they've built the foundation of their class. They've built and now it's about, finishing the ceiling, getting to the ceiling, getting to the top, adding their top prospects and locking them in. And I think there's certainly reason to be optimistic about Utah's chances to do exactly that. So, like I said, Utah is in a good spot with who's left on their board, which includes a number of their top targets, including the number one players in the state of Utah and Idaho, that being Celeste Moa and Kelvin Obot, as well as Jaron and Kenan Pula, out of Timpview. So those are probably the top four prospects on the board. But then you've still got others that would really help and round out the class as well. In Bishop Gorman, defensive lineman Prince Williams, and Olympus stud athlete Adam Bywater. And I think Utah has sits in a pretty good spot with all six of those guys, and I'll go more in depth individually here with each of them. But let's say Utah closes on those top prospects, and assuming that they do, right, that is going to give them a pretty significant bump up the team rankings, depending on who all commits and that sort of stuff. Utah could add anywhere from 30 to 50 points to their team ranking score, and that would get them anywhere from, like I said, top 35, potentially cracking the top 30, but certainly at the top. And I think breaking that 200-point threshold in 24/7 Sports team rankings is an absolute must for Utah. That is, that's typically where you'll see the top 30 classes where it starts to break off. But getting to that 200 score is indicative of a handful of blue chip prospects being 4-5 star type guys, and then a really solid collection of commits as well. So Utah needs to get there, and I think there's reason to be pretty optimistic about Utah's chances of doing exactly that. So let's dive into some of these individual recruitments, and let's start with the number one player in the state of Utah, Celessi Moa out of Fremont. Obviously, the Moa name, a legacy kid, and Celessi, man, he's got the goods, man. Like he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, the quick twitch athleticism, and he's just got the playmaking instincts on both sides of the ball. So he plays on a 7-on-7 squad, and they were out at the OT7 event out in Florida, and Celessi Moa was one of the standouts each and every day of that event. And it was both offense and defensive production, and I think Utah would love to add another two-way player like Moa after watching Sione Vaki do what he did a couple seasons ago. I think Utah would love to add another dynamite player like that, and Moa is certainly capable of that, given his again his combination of size, athleticism, and skill. I think Moa is capable of doing just that. With his recruitment, I think Utah's in a good spot, and I think this is where NIL really comes to the aid of a program like Utah. When you consider Moa being the talent that he is, he's got a lot of really good programs involved with him. Michigan, Tennessee, Michigan State was in the mix for him. Oklahoma was pushing for him. Washington has surged in his recruitment as well, and so Utah is at the forefront of the conversation with Moa, and I think that includes Tennessee, and I think Michigan is at the top for him as well. So this is coming down the final stretch of his recruitment. I think Michigan is really coming on strong for Moa. Tennessee had him in for the final visit over the June 20th weekend, and they made a really strong impression. But Utah continues to be at the forefront of the conversation for Moa, and I think he is the big key for Utah this cycle. If they can land the number one player in the state of Utah, that will really bode well for them moving forward. And so I think he's the big focus, in the class, because he could just do so much for you, and so he's the key. And again, like I said, I think it's coming down to Utah, Tennessee, and Michigan, and I think Washington is fading a little bit, but they're still a threat as well. But I think those are probably the top four, in terms of Moa's recruitment right now. The number one player in the state of Idaho, Kelvin Obot. I think he's another really, really important target for Utah, given what is likely to leave the program after the season at offensive tackle, with Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu potentially being, day one, day two type NFL draft prospects. You would love to secure Obot's commitment because he is exactly the type that can come in and can help right away. And so, kind of a similar story. Utah has been at the forefront of the conversation for Obot all spring long. I think they've been in a really comfortable spot, and again, NIL certainly plays a role, but the key relationship is Jordan Gross, his head coach, and obviously, we've talked about that a lot in the past, but that's been really beneficial, and I think given the opportunity at Utah with Fano and Lomu potentially moving on next year, combined with just a number of other factors being location, the history, the tradition of Utah football as well, I think really bodes well for Utah in his recruitment. But they're going to have to fend off Michigan. Michigan hosted Obot for his final official visit, and so that's going to be what it comes down to. I think there was some talk last week that Oregon had kind of re-entered the picture, but I reached out to somebody that has a pretty good grasp of Oregon recruiting, and he mentioned three other offensive linemen kind of emerging as the focus of the Ducks recruitment, along the offensive line, and we've already seen one of those players commit earlier today. We've seen one in Tommy Tofi back off of his commitment to Cal, and then the other is a 5-star Iheanacho. I forget his first name, but Iheanacho is the other offensive lineman that they're pushing for. So I think Oregon Oregon's always going to be a threat, and I think people just kind of view them as if they're involved, they're the favorite, that sort of thing. But I do think that Utah. That this is still a Utah-Michigan battle, and so can they hold on and finish the deal? I still feel pretty optimistic, pretty confident that Utah's in a good spot to secure Obot's pledge, being where we're at right now, June 30th, 5:30 p.m. So still feel good about Obot, but again, got to finish. And then a couple other recruitments to follow here. Over the last week, Utah's been trending quite well for Jaron and Kenan Pula, the twins out of Lone Peak, who recently backed off of their commitment to UCLA following an official visit to the University of Utah. They are two of the three remaining prospects that officially visited that weekend that haven't publicly committed. So we'll see, but things behind the scenes continue to sound really positive for Utah. And I think I would be surprised if we don't see something relatively soon in regards to the Pula twins in Utah. I think this is for Utah to potentially land Jaron and Kenan Pula, I think is pretty significant, given that you could potentially add the number 5 and number 8 player in the state this class. And these are two players that, again, Jaron Pula is a dynamite receiver type, which Utah needs help there. They always need help there. And then Kenan Pula has some two-way potential as well as a wide receiver and safety. So you like that two-way ability, and I think Utah is in a really good spot for the two of them. Just need to get it done and have them announce their potential commitment here soon. So I think that could get the ball rolling. And then Bishop Gorman, defensive lineman Prince Williams, he's got a July 4th commitment date set. I like where Utah's at with him. They've sort of been in the driver's seat in his recruitment, but BYU and Arizona have made a very strong push for Prince Williams, and so this is going to be one to pay close attention to over the next few days. But I still like where Utah's at with Prince Williams, and potentially adding him to this class would be a nice boost to that defensive line. You've already got Raymond, who's again a 6'6", 250-pound prospect. Then you add a player like Williams, who could potentially play defensive end, defensive tackle. I think he would be a dynamite 3-tech defensive lineman. I think he'd be really good in that role, and I think that's kind of the hope and goal for Utah with Williams. So he's got a July 4th commitment date. And Utah continues to look good for him as well. And then Olympus athlete Adam Bywater. His recruitment is centered on Boise State, BYU, and Utah. And, he took three official visits to those three, took an official visit to those three programs, and had a really positive experience with all three. But I think Utah has sort of emerged as the favorite. Now, obviously, Bywater's going to take some time here. I think he's currently on vacation, but he's going to take some time to mull over his decision and what would potentially be best for him. But given what I last heard, I think Utah's in a good spot for Bywater. And this is, again, another kid where you're adding a kid that's 6'3", 210 pounds, good athlete, could play a multitude of positions, add some versatility to that linebacker room, to your defense in general. And I think you would love to add a player like Adam Bywater to the class to really round it out. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But again, if Utah can close on the majority of those remaining top targets, that's really going to boost their class and help them get closer to a top 30 type class and towards the top of the Big 12 in the team rankings. So some work to do to finish up and close out on a handful of these guys. But I think Utah fans should feel pretty optimistic about where things are at and where things could potentially end up with their remaining targets. So there's that. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk Utah basketball recruiting. And, this is going to be a lot of fun to dive into basketball recruiting and make this more of a focal point for me and what I'm covering with Utah. It was kind of difficult to cover recruiting under the previous regime. And, I don't fault Craig Smith for going about it the way that he did. It's how he kind of came up in the business and in the industry, and he felt that he had to go about things in a certain manner and kind of keep things in house and keep things to himself, which is fair and all that. But I think with Alex, with Wes Wilcox, with Coach Chilius, you're going to see a more open program on a number of different fronts, but most notably on the recruiting trail. And I think Utah is going to be involved with a number of top 50, top 100, top 150 type of prospects. And I think that's exciting. I genuinely believe that Utah is going to be, in the mix for top prospects in the country. Maybe not right away, because they've got to establish themselves both in terms of their product on the court this season, but also their relationships, on the recruiting trail. And having Coach Chilius in place is significant in helping Utah get off on the right foot. Having somebody like Coach Chills who has those past relationships will be key to lean on. But still, Alex, Wes themselves are going to have to develop their own relationships. And I think, as they do that this year, this is going to be really fascinating to watch how it unfolds. I think this 2026 recruiting cycle is going to be super interesting. It's clear that based on, who they've offered so far, that Utah wants to push for high-level high school talent. I think their mindset is that, if they're going to bring in freshmen, they want to bring in, impact players within year one or year two. Now, maybe it takes them a year or two to establish themselves and to get to that level, but I think that is the ultimate goal, is, bringing in one or two high school guys each and every year that can come in and can contribute and can help you on the floor. And I think that'll be really exciting, because you typically need to bring in, high level prospects in order to do that, especially in the Big 12. So, it's interesting with Alex and Wes both coming to this level from the NBA. There's going to be a lot of learning for them. There's going to be a bit of a learning curve as they kind of get a feel for, how they want to go about, roster construction, because there are different sources now with high school recruiting, with transfer portal recruiting, and now international becoming a much larger, holding a much larger presence in roster construction. We'll get a better feel for how Utah wants to go about their recruiting and their roster construction. But again, just based on who they've offered so far, I think it's pretty apparent that Utah wants to push for high-level high school talent. So, so let's dive into some of the guys that I think Utah's going to push for over the next couple of classes who they're essentially laying the foundation with in terms of their recruiting and who they're pushing for. It's been really fun to dive into this with Utah basketball. And one sec here. And so, with the 2026 class, Utah's first two offers went to Wasatch Academy's junior county and Cottrell Harmon. Those are two combo guards that I think Utah would love to add to the mix. Both of whom have the ability to handle, the ability to play make, and the ability to shoot. They bring good athleticism. But again, talking about this 2026 class, Utah is playing catch up here, right? County and Harmon have been recruited by a number of really good programs for a bit longer than Alex and this staff have. So they're playing catch up, but I do think it's notable that those two were the first two offers that Utah extended to high school prospects when this staff took over. So, those guys are going to be ones to keep an eye on. And then another player that I think will be really interesting to follow is Abdou Toure out of Connecticut. He was the first to receive a new offer from this staff. So both County and Harmon at Wasatch Academy were offered by Craig Smith, by the previous staff, and were reoffered by Utah. But Torrey was the first to get a totally new offer. So he's top 25 prospect. I think he's top 30 right now, but he is trending positively. He's had a really, really good spring. He's a 6'6", 185-pound guard has athleticism, has skill. He's a good defensive player, but again, he is a really dynamic athlete. And when you consider what Utah has emphasized in their first few months in terms of their roster construction, he's exactly the type of athlete that you want to recruit at the high school level that will fit this same sort of identity. So Abdou Toure is going to be one to keep a close eye on. Josh Powell is another 6'5" combo guard who has had a really, really good spring. He's actually one that I'm keeping a very close eye on. He's going to play for Veritas Academy Prep, and he's a guy that's had a good spring and seen his recruitment really kind of blow up. But Utah was one of his more recent offers. He picked up an offer in late May, and I think Coach Chills has done a really, really good job of developing that relationship with Powell. And I think Powell is actually is closing in on a visit here in the next couple of months. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Josh Powell announce an official visit here soon. I think he's going to be one that Utah makes a pretty strong push for. Again, fits the mold of what they're pushing for, of what they're trying to bring in terms of the athleticism, the defensive mentality, the skill set. He's a good combo guard at 6'5". He's got a big frame at 205 pounds as well. And Josh Powell, has told me that he's developed a really good relationship with Coach Chills and with Utah. So he will be one to keep a close eye on as well. And then Dean Ruckert out of Timpview, it seems like he's growing pretty in more ways than what he's getting bigger, man. Like he was a guard last year. Now he's a 6'8" wing, and his recruitment mirrors that same sort of growth where he's now got a top 5. He just announced the top 5 that includes BYU, Washington, Clemson, Stanford, and Utah. And he's got an official visit set up with BYU. I think that's actually going to come with next month for Ruckert, and I would call BYU the favorite for Ruckert, but I think Utah is trending in the right direction with him in terms of playing catch up and making a push for him. I think Utah certainly has room to add a player like Ruker who would fit nicely on the wing, and I think he's going to be one to keep a close eye on as well. So those are probably the top targets for Utah in this 2026 class right now. And then in 2027, things are getting pretty interesting. So they've offered the number one player in the class in Baba Oloduten, who's a 6'8" wing. Utah offered him last month in the month of May, and they continue to push and communicate with a handful of other top 50, top 10 prospects in that 2027 class. And this is the class where I think you'll see the payoff of what Utah is doing in this 2027 class, right? So this 2026 class, it's about establishing relationships. It's about setting the foundation. And, Utah is playing catch up. But this 2027 class, this is where Utah is essentially starting on pretty even footing with everybody else. And so I think Utah pushing for, top talent in this 2027 class will be really, really, I think will be really productive for them to make this their focus. So Baba Oloduten, the number one player in the class, Crew Fotheringham out of Lone Peak. Yes, he's the younger brother of Cole Fotheringham. He is a really exciting prospect, given his 6'8" frame and his skill set. He's a 3-and-D player. He's got good length, just good skill. RJ Moore is a top 50 guard out of North Carolina. He's got offers from Wake Forest, Rutgers, and a handful of other programs, but Utah has made a good impression with him. And then a couple other guys, Paul Osayuri, he's a big in the 2027 class. I think he's a top 10 player in the class. And then Beckham Black is a top 25 player and the younger brother of Anthony Black. Utah getting in the mix there for him as well. So Utah's going to push for a lot of top talent, and it'll be a lot of fun to cover Utah basketball recruiting, which I can't remember the last time I said that, but certainly excited about this staff and sort of their vision. I think Alex has really done a remarkable job of building this staff in his vision. Bringing in Wes Wilcox, I think, has been a tremendous thing for Utah basketball in having somebody that has the basketball acumen that he does, the ability to evaluate talent, and the ability to negotiate. I think that those are three things that I think will give Utah a really distinct advantage on the recruiting trail, and I'm excited for this staff to see what they do with Coach Chills and everybody else contributing to their efforts as well. I think Utah fans should feel really optimistic and confident, in Alex Jensen and Wes Wilcox and what they're doing and sort of their vision for this program. They want to return it to its glory days. They know what it's going to take, and I think they're going about it the right way, where they're confident in their experience and what that's brought them in their operating and operation mode and how they're going about their business. But they're also coming at this with a bit of humility because they are new to the college level, and so they're taking in a lot, they're learning, and I think that's going to be a really distinct advantage for them as they come into this knowing what they know and having the confidence in themselves and having dealt with NBA players, knowing what good basketball looks like and building towards that. I think Utah fans should feel really confident in these two individuals specifically and their leadership in getting Utah basketball back to its back to the level that we all wanted to. So that's what I've got on this one. Appreciate everybody. 40 minutes, that's a lot of me yapping, but appreciate everybody tuning in and supporting the Utah Blockcast. I'll have more next month as we, like I said, as we get into Big 12 Media Days, we'll have a recap from Dallas. I'll have a recap from Dallas on the Utah Blockcast, and then start getting some of these commits on the show with me as well, and we'll dive into all that. So excited about that. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. And this is Steve Bartle signing off.